Have you ever looked at a map of Texas and wondered why so much of it is marked as private property? Drive through the state for just an hour and you'll notice something unusual. Long stretches of fences, massive ranches, private roads, and signs that simply say, "No trespassing." It almost feels as if the land never truly belongs to the public. But here's the strange part. Texas isn't just another American state. Nearly 95% of its land is privately owned. That's one of the highest percentages in the entire United States. Compare that to western states like Nevada or Utah, where the federal government owns huge portions of the land. So why is Texas so different? Why didn't the federal government keep most of its land like it did elsewhere? The answer goes back nearly 2 centuries, to a revolution, a young republic, and one of the biggest land deals in American history. Understanding this story doesn't just explain Texas. It explains why Texans think differently about freedom, property, and even government itself. Because in Texas, land isn't just land. It's identity. Imagine waking up one day and realizing the country you live in no longer exists. In the early 1800s, Texas wasn't part of the United States. It belonged to Mexico. At the time, the region was vast, isolated, and difficult to control. To strengthen its northern frontier, the Mexican government invited settlers from the United States to move into Texas. Thousands accepted the offer. They built farms, raised cattle, started businesses, and slowly, the population changed. But as more American settlers arrived, tensions grew. The settlers wanted greater freedom. The Mexican government wanted greater control. Disagreements over laws, taxes, and political rights eventually exploded into open conflict. In 1836, Texas declared its independence. After a fierce war, including the famous Battle of the Alamo and the decisive victory at San Jacinto, Texas became something few people remember today: an independent country. For nearly 10 years, Texas was not a U.S. state. It was the Republic of Texas. It had its own president, its own army, its own currency, and most importantly, it claimed ownership of its own land. This single fact would shape Texas for generations. Unlike many Western territories that were controlled directly by the U.S. federal government, Texas entered the United States in 1845. While keeping control over most of its public lands, that decision changed everything. Instead of Washington owning enormous areas, Texas managed much of its own land and gradually sold or granted it to settlers, ranchers, railroad companies, schools, and businesses. Over time, private ownership spread across nearly the entire state, and the effects of that decision are still visible today. Drive across Texas now, and you're not just passing through open countryside. You're crossing land that has often been owned by families for generations. Some ranches are so large they have existed for more than a century, passed from one generation to the next. What began as a political decision nearly 200 years ago became part of Texas culture itself. But this raises another question. If so much land became privately owned, how did Texas create some of the largest ranches in the entire world? The answer begins with one animal: the longhorn. As Texas grew, one animal quietly transformed the entire state: the Texas longhorn. Unlike many breeds of cattle brought from Europe, Longhorns were incredibly tough. They could survive scorching summers, long periods without water, and endless stretches of open land. For ranchers, they were the perfect animals for a place as vast as Texas. But there was one problem. There were no refrigerated trucks, no highways, and no modern transportation. If ranchers wanted to sell their cattle, they had to move them themselves. So they did. Thousands of cowboys would gather enormous herds and drive them hundreds of miles across the open frontier. Some journeys lasted for months. The trails became legendary. Names like the Chisholm Trail and the Goodnight Loving Trail entered American history. Along these routes, ranches grew larger and larger. Owning just a few acres wasn't enough. Cattle needed room to graze. Water sources had to be protected. And during harsh seasons, extra land could mean the difference between survival and disaster. So families kept buying more land. Successful ranches expanded even further. Over time, some ranches became so large that they felt like small countries. One of the most famous examples is the King Ranch. Covering more than 800,000 acres, it is larger than some entire counties in the United States. Generations of the same family helped turn it into one of the world's most famous cattle ranches. And King Ranch wasn't the only one. Across Texas, massive ranches became symbols of wealth, independence, and pride. Owning land wasn't simply about making money. It became part of a person's identity. Even today, many Texans dream of owning a piece of land not just as an investment, but as a symbol of freedom. That idea has been passed down for generations. But as these ranches expanded, another change was taking place, something that would permanently transform the Texas landscape. Barbed wire. A simple invention that divided the open frontier forever. For decades, Texas had no clear boundaries between many ranches. Cattle wandered freely across the open range. Cowboys moved herds across vast stretches of land. And ownership was often defined more by tradition than by fences. It was a system that worked until the population exploded. More settlers arrived, more farms appeared, more ranches competed for the same land. Conflicts became unavoidable. Farmers wanted to protect their crops. Ranchers wanted their cattle to roam. The open frontier that had once symbolized freedom was becoming increasingly chaotic. Then, in the 1870s, a simple invention changed everything. Barbed wire. At first glance, it didn't seem revolutionary. It was just thin steel wire with sharp metal barbs. Cheap to produce, easy to transport, and surprisingly effective. For the first time, landowners could fence off enormous areas without spending a fortune on wooden fences. Almost overnight, Texas began to change. Miles of barbed wire stretched across the plains. Open grasslands became private ranches. The famous open range slowly disappeared. Not everyone welcomed the change. Some ranchers believed fences destroyed the cowboy way of life. Others cut fences at night, leading to violent disputes known as the fence-cutting wars. Communities were divided. Neighbors turned against each other. In some areas, people were even killed over fences. But progress could not be stopped. By the end of the 19th century, barbed wire had permanently reshaped Texas. The endless open frontier that had defined the Old West was gone. In its place stood millions of acres of clearly marked private property. And those fences still define much of Texas today. Drive through the state now, and you'll notice them almost everywhere. Long fences stretching toward the horizon, locked gates, private ranch entrances, signs warning visitors to keep out. They're more than simple barriers. They're reminders of a turning point in American history. A moment when freedom on the frontier gave way to clearly defined ownership. But there's another reason Texans care so deeply about private land. One that has nothing to do with cattle, and everything to do with what lies beneath the ground. Oil. At the beginning of the 20th century, most people believed Texas was valuable because of its cattle. They were wrong. Beneath the endless fields and quiet ranches lay one of the greatest sources of wealth in American history. Oil. On January 10, 1901, a drilling operation near Beaumont, Texas, suddenly erupted. Without warning, a massive column of oil shot high into the sky. The well became known as Spindletop. For days, thousands of barrels of oil poured out of the ground every single day. News spread across America almost overnight. Investors rushed to Texas. Workers arrived by the thousands. Small towns exploded into booming cities. What had once been quiet, farmland, suddenly became some of the most valuable property in the country. But the biggest winners weren't always the oil companies. They were often the people who already owned the land. Because in Texas, owning land often meant owning the rights to what lay beneath it. If oil was discovered under your property, your life could change forever. Some families became wealthy almost overnight. Others earned steady royalty payments for generations. This created a very different relationship between Texans and their land. Land was no longer just a place to build a home or raise cattle. It became an asset, a legacy, a source of long-term wealth. Parents passed ranches to their children. Children passed them to the next generation. And with every generation, one belief grew even stronger. Protect your land. Because once it's gone, you may never get it back. That mindset still influences Texas today. Even now, many landowners carefully guard their property. Not simply because of what's on the surface, but because of what might still be hidden below. And this helps explain something visitors often notice. The fences, the gates, the private property signs, they're not just protecting fields. They're protecting generations of history, opportunity, and independence. But this raises one final question. If private land is so important in Texas, how has it shaped the people who live there today? The answer reveals why Texas still feels different from almost every other state in America. Today, if you drive across Texas, you'll still see what generations before you saw. Miles of fences stretching across the horizon. Massive ranches that seem to never end. Private roads leading to places most people will never visit. To an outsider, it might seem unusual. Why so much private land? Why so many gates? Why so many no trespassing signs? But for many Texans, those fences represent something much bigger than property. They represent history. Unlike many other states, Texas spent years as an independent republic. It managed much of its own land before joining the United States. Large ranches became the backbone of its economy. Then oil transformed ordinary land into extraordinary wealth. Generation after generation, families passed that land to their children. With every passing decade, ownership became more than a legal right. It became part of Texas' identity. That is why conversations about land in Texas are often conversations about freedom, responsibility, family, and independence. The landscape itself tells the story. Every fence marks a decision made long ago. Every ranch reflects generations of hard work. And every gate reminds us that history doesn't simply disappear. It stays on the land. So, the next time you look at a map of Texas, or drive past another endless fence stretching toward the horizon, remember, you're not just looking at private property. You're looking at nearly 200 years of history. A history shaped by revolution, cattle, barbed wire, oil, and the belief that land is far more than something you own. Sometimes, it's who you are. If you enjoyed discovering the hidden history behind places we often take for granted, subscribe for more stories about America, history, and the surprising reasons the world looks the way it does. Because every place has a story, and we're just getting started.